The dust kicked up around Eleanor Novak's worn boots as she stepped off the stagecoach in Animas Forks, Colorado, her heart hammering against her ribcage like a wild Mustang trying to break free. September of 1878 had brought her to this remote mining town, nestled high in the San Juan Mountains, where she hoped to disappear from her past and start fresh as a seamstress, far from the opera halls of Philadelphia, where her father had controlled every breath she took, every note she sang, until his death 6 months ago had finally set her free. The mountain air bit at her cheeks, crisp and thin at nearly 11,000 feet elevation, so different from the humid summers back east. Eleanor clutched her threadbare carpetbag tighter, surveying the rough settlement before her. Wooden buildings lined the muddy main street, their paint already weathered by harsh winters. Men in dusty clothes moved between the saloons and mining offices, their faces hardened by the unforgiving labor of extracting silver from the mountainsides. "Miss Novak." A woman's voice called out, and Eleanor turned to see a plump woman in her 50s approaching, her expression warm despite the severe bun pulling back her graying hair. "I'm Margaret Sullivan. I received your letter about the seamstress position." "Mrs. Sullivan, yes, thank you for meeting me." Eleanor extended her hand, grateful for the firm handshake she received in return. "Come along, dear. You look exhausted. The boarding house has a room ready and we can discuss the work tomorrow." Margaret took one of Eleanor's bags without waiting for permission and started down the street. "I must warn you, Animas Forks isn't like Philadelphia. Life is hard up here, especially when winter comes. We get snowed in for months." "That suits me just fine," Eleanor replied, meaning every word. The more isolated, the better. No one here would know about her voice, about the years her father had paraded her through concert halls and private performances for wealthy patrons who looked at her like a prized horse. No one would demand she sing on command, would criticize every imperfect trill, would slap her hands with a conductor's baton when she dared to interpret a piece with her own feelings rather than mechanical precision. The boarding house was simple but clean, and Eleanor fell asleep that first night to the sound of wind whistling through the mountain peaks, a lullaby far sweeter than any she had ever performed. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of needle and thread. Eleanor proved her worth quickly, mending miners' work clothes, altering dresses for the few women in town, and even creating a wedding dress for a young bride from simple muslin and salvaged lace. Her fingers flew through the fabric with the same precision she had once applied to vocal exercises, but this work brought satisfaction without the accompanying dread. She kept to herself mostly, speaking only when necessary, declining invitations to social gatherings. The other women found her pleasant but distant, and she preferred it that way. The less they knew about her, the less they could demand. It was a Thursday afternoon in early October when everything changed. Eleanor had been delivering a repaired shirt to the general store, her head down against the autumn wind, when a commotion erupted near the livery stable. Shouts echoed off the mountainsides, and she looked up to see a horse rearing, wild-eyed and panicked, while a man struggled to maintain control of the reins. The horse was magnificent even in its terror, a paint stallion with patches of brown and white across its muscular frame. But something was wrong with its front left leg, blood streaming from a gash just above the hoof. The man holding the reins was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell past his collar beneath a battered hat. His face showed concern rather than anger as he spoke in low, soothing tones to the frightened animal. "Easy now, easy. I've got you, boy. We're going to fix this." His voice carried a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. the leather chaps and dusty shirt of someone who spent his life on horseback. Several other men stood at a distance, offering useless advice but making no move to help. Eleanor found herself stepping closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. The horse's panic reminded her of her own trapped desperation during her final months in Philadelphia. "Can I help?" The words left her mouth before she could stop them, surprising herself as much as the cowboy. He glanced up, and Eleanor's breath caught at the intensity of his blue eyes, bright as a Colorado sky. "Best stay back, miss. Thunder here is spooked real bad, and I don't want you getting hurt." "I'm not afraid of horses," Eleanor said, which was mostly true. She had ridden occasionally in her youth, before her father had forbidden anything that might damage her voice or appearance. The cowboy studied her for a moment, then nodded toward his saddlebag. "There's clean cloth in there if you can reach it. Need to wrap this leg before he bleeds much more." Eleanor moved carefully, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. The horse's ears flicked toward her, but the cowboy's steady stream of calming words seemed to help. She retrieved the cloth and approached from the side, letting Thunder see her clearly. "That's it," the cowboy murmured, though Eleanor wasn't sure if he was talking to her or the horse. Nice and easy. Working together, they managed to clean and wrap the wound, the cowboy's strong hands holding the leg steady while Eleanor's nimble fingers secured the bandage. When it was done, Thunder had calmed considerably, only occasionally tossing his head. "Thank you kindly, miss," the cowboy said, wiping blood from his hands with a kerchief. "Not many folks would step up like that. I'm Thomas Irving, by the way. Most folks call me Tom. Eleanor Novak." She found herself studying his face, the strong jaw shadowed with stubble, the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. There was something inherently trustworthy about him, though she had learned long ago that first impressions could deceive. "You're the new seamstress Margaret hired." It wasn't a question. "Word travels fast in a small town, so I'm learning." Eleanor stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how her heart was beating faster than the situation warranted. "I should let you tend to your horse." "Wait." Tom's hand moved as if to reach for her arm but stopped short, hovering in the air between them. "I'd like to thank you proper. Would you allow me to buy you dinner at the boarding house tonight? The food's decent, and I promise I cleaned up better than this." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse, to retreat back into her careful solitude. But something in Tom's expression, hopeful and genuine without any trace of the demanding arrogance she had known in Philadelphia society, made her hesitate. "Just dinner," she heard herself say. "Nothing more." His smile transformed his whole face, and Eleanor felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "Just dinner," he agreed. That evening, Tom appeared at the boarding house in clean denims and a pressed shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously as he waited for Eleanor in the small dining room. She had changed into her better dress, a simple gray wool that she had trimmed herself with black velvet at the collar and cuffs. "You look lovely," Tom said, then immediately colored. "I mean, that's a fine dress. I don't mean to be forward." Eleanor surprised herself by smiling. "Thank you. How is Thunder?" Resting comfortable at the livery. "The wound wasn't as deep as it looked, thank goodness." Tom pulled out a chair for her, and they sat at one of the small tables near the window. Outside, the sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The boarding house served roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, simple fare but well prepared. As they ate, Tom proved to be easy company, neither pressing her with invasive questions nor dominating the conversation with boasts about himself. Instead, he told her about his work as a ranch hand on the Triple Creek Ranch, about 5 miles down the valley. Been there 3 years now, he explained, sopping up gravy with a piece of bread. Saving up to buy my own spread someday. Nothing fancy, just enough land for a small herd and maybe some horses. Thunder's the first I've bought myself. Been breaking and training horses for Mr. Harrison, the ranch owner, but Thunder's mine. That's a good dream, Eleanor said softly, having something of your own. What about you? Tom's gaze was curious but not probing. What brings a seamstress all the way from Philadelphia to a rough mining town? Eleanor had prepared an answer for this inevitable question, a story that was true in its way, if incomplete. I needed a fresh start. Sometimes a person needs to be somewhere new, where they can decide who they want to be. Tom nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. I reckon I understand that. Left Missouri myself after my folks passed. Wanted to see what I could make of myself without everyone remembering me as the Irving boy whose daddy drank himself to death. The honesty in his confession surprised Eleanor. She had expected platitudes, not painful truths. I'm sorry about your parents. It was a while back, but thank you. Tom cleared his throat, changing the subject. So you're planning to stay through winter? It gets mighty cold up here. Some folks can't take it, head down to lower elevations come November. I'm staying, Eleanor said firmly. I like the quiet. Something in her tone must have conveyed finality, because Tom simply nodded and steered the conversation to lighter topics. He told her about the upcoming harvest festival, how the whole valley came together for one last celebration before winter locked them in. He made her laugh with a story about a mule named Ulysses who had developed a taste for tobacco and would steal it from unsuspecting miners. When the meal ended, Tom walked her to the stairs leading to the boarding rooms, stopping at the base. I enjoyed this evening, Eleanor. Would you mind if I called on you again? Eleanor knew she should say no. Getting close to anyone meant risking exposure, risking questions she wasn't ready to answer. But standing in the warm lamplight, looking up at Tom's honest face, she found herself wanting to say yes with an intensity that frightened her. I'd like that, she whispered. Tom's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Good night then, Eleanor. Good night, Thomas. The next weeks fell into a pattern that filled Eleanor with equal parts joy and terror. Tom called on her twice a week, always respectful, always genuine. They took walks along the creek when the weather permitted, talking about everything and nothing. Tom told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his dream of raising horses that would be known throughout Colorado for their quality and temperament. Eleanor shared what she could, talking about her childhood before her mother's death, before her father had become obsessed with molding her into the perfect performer. She told Tom about loving books, about wishing she could have attended a real school instead of being tutored at home by a series of governesses who taught her French and deportment, but never mathematics or science. You're educated, though, Tom observed one afternoon as they sat by the creek, watching the water tumble over smooth stones. You talk different from most folks around here. Use bigger words. My father insisted on proper education, Eleanor said carefully. He had specific ambitions for me. Did you fulfill them? Tom asked, then quickly added, You don't have to answer if you don't want. Eleanor picked up a pebble, turning it over in her fingers. I tried for many years, but in the end what he wanted and what I needed were too different. After he died, I chose my own path. Tom reached over and gently squeezed her hand. I'm glad your path led here. The simple touch sent warmth flooding through Eleanor's body. When had she started caring for this cowboy with his calloused hands and gentle manner? When had his smile become the thing she looked forward to most in her carefully ordered days? As October gave way to November, the first serious snows began to fall. Animas Forks transformed into a white wonderland, though the beauty came with genuine hardship. The mining work continued, but at a slower pace, and the town began to take on the insular feeling of a place preparing to be cut off from the outside world. The Harvest Festival arrived on the first Saturday in November, held in the town's largest building, a combination community hall and church. Eleanor had helped several women with their dresses for the occasion and felt obligated to attend, despite her preference for solitude. The hall was decorated with pine boughs and the last of the autumn flowers, preserved as long as possible despite the cold. Tables lined the walls, laden with contributed dishes. A makeshift stage had been erected at one end, and several men were tuning instruments. 2 fiddles, a guitar, and a harmonica. Eleanor arrived early, hoping to help with preparations and avoid being the center of attention. Margaret Sullivan put her to work immediately, arranging food and setting out plates and cutlery. Other women bustled about, and Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly in the focused activity. Eleanor. Tom's voice cut through the chatter, and she turned to see him entering the hall with several other ranch hands from Triple Creek. He had cleaned up nicely, his hair neatly combed, his shirt clearly freshly washed and pressed. The sight of him made her stomach flutter. He crossed the room to her, seemingly oblivious to the knowing looks from several of the older women. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, taking in her blue dress, the best she owned, which she had altered to fit better through the waist. "You clean up well yourself, Cowboy," Eleanor replied, surprising herself with the teasing tone. Tom grinned. "Save me a dance later. I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I. We can be terrible together." Eleanor laughed despite herself. "All right, one dance." As the evening progressed, the hall filled with people from the surrounding area. Miners mixed with ranchers, families with single men hoping to find wives before the long winter. The musicians struck up lively tunes, and dancing began in earnest, couples spinning and stomping in approximations of reels and waltzes. Eleanor stood along the wall, watching, her foot tapping unconsciously to the rhythm. The music was rough and unpolished, nothing like the orchestras she had performed with, but there was an honesty to it, a joy that no formal concert had ever captured. "May I have this dance?" Tom appeared beside her, extending his hand with an exaggerated bow that made her smile. "You may." Tom led her onto the floor just as the musicians began a slower waltz. He placed one hand carefully on her waist, holding her other hand in his, maintaining a respectful distance. They moved awkwardly at first, Tom clearly concentrating hard on not stepping on her feet. "Relax," Eleanor murmured. "Feel the rhythm. It's just 3 beats. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Tom listened, and gradually his movements became smoother. They glided across the floor, and Eleanor found herself moving closer, drawn by the warmth of his body, the clean scent of soap and leather. Around them, other couples danced, but Eleanor barely noticed them. Her world had narrowed to the man holding her, to the steady beat of his heart that she could feel through his shirt, to the way he looked at her like she was something precious and rare. When the song ended, they stood still for a moment, neither wanting to break the spell. Then the musicians launched into a fast-paced reel, and the moment passed. Tom led her back to the side, both of them slightly breathless. "Some water," he offered, and Eleanor nodded gratefully. While Tom went to fetch drinks, Margaret Sullivan approached Eleanor with a speculative gleam in her eye. "That young man is quite taken with you, dear." "We're just friends," Eleanor protested, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Margaret's expression suggested she didn't believe that for a moment. "Well, friendship is a fine foundation. Tom Irving is a good man, hardworking and honest. You could do far worse." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion near the stage drew everyone's attention. One of the fiddlers, an older man named Jake, was coughing violently, his face red. His wife rushed over with water, and after a few tense moments, Jake's breathing eased. But when he tried to lift his fiddle again, his hands shook too badly to manage the bow. "Lung fever," his wife said grimly. "I told him he shouldn't come tonight, but he insisted." The other musicians looked at each other uncertainly. "We can manage with one fiddle," the guitar player said, but his tone lacked confidence. Much of the music they played relied on the harmony between the two violins. "Shame," someone nearby muttered. "Was looking forward to the singing later." "Singing?" Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. "Jake always leads a few songs after the dancing," Margaret explained. "Old cowboy ballads, some hymns. Nothing fancy, but it's tradition. Guess we'll have to skip it this year." Eleanor felt something twist inside her chest. These people had so little entertainment, especially with winter approaching. They worked brutally hard, facing dangers from cave-ins to avalanches to simple starvation if supplies ran short. This one night of celebration meant everything to them. The sensible part of her brain screamed to stay silent, to let the evening proceed without her. But she thought of Tom's kindness, of Margaret's welcoming nature, of the way this rough town had given her sanctuary without asking for anything in return. Before she fully realized what she was doing, Eleanor stepped forward. "I can help," she heard herself say, her voice carrying in the suddenly quiet hall. Tom appeared at her elbow with the water, confusion on his face. "Eleanor," she took the cup from him, buying herself a moment to reconsider, but the decision was made. These people deserved whatever small gift she could offer. "I know some songs," she said, addressing the musicians. "If you can play, I can sing." The guitar player, a weathered man named Pete, looked skeptical. "You ever sung for a crowd before, miss?" Eleanor almost laughed at the irony. "Once or twice." "Well, all right then. Come on up here and let's see what you've got." Tom caught her arm gently as she moved toward the stage. "Eleanor, you don't have to do this if you're not comfortable." She met his eyes, seeing genuine concern there, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I want to," she said, and meant it. The stage felt familiar beneath her feet despite the rough wooden planks being nothing like the polished stages of Philadelphia. Eleanor faced the crowd, perhaps 70 people in total, their faces curious and expectant. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from stage fright. She had performed for audiences 10 times this size without nervousness. What frightened her was the vulnerability, the exposure of showing these people a part of herself she had sworn to bury. But when she looked at Tom, standing near the front with his hat in his hands and faith shining in his eyes, she remembered why she had offered. "What do you know?" Pete asked, his guitar ready. Eleanor ran through options in her mind. Most of her repertoire was classical, opera, art songs in multiple languages. But her mother had loved American folk music, had sung ballads to Eleanor when she was small. She still remembered those, treasured them as her only uncomplicated musical memories. "You know Barbara Allen?" she asked. The remaining fiddler brightened. "Yes, madam, key of G." "Perfect." The musicians conferred briefly, then the fiddle began, sweet and mournful. Pete's guitar joined in, and Eleanor took a breath, reaching for that place deep inside where her voice lived, where all the training and discipline resided alongside the pure love of music she had felt as a child. When she began to sing, the hall fell absolutely silent. Eleanor's voice soared through the old ballad, clear and pure and achingly beautiful. She poured into it all the longing she had felt in Philadelphia, all the freedom she had found in Animas Forks, all the tentative hope that had bloomed in her heart since meeting Tom. The tragic story of Barbara Allen and her lost love flowed through the hall, and Eleanor saw tears on several faces, saw rough miners standing transfixed, saw Tom staring at her with an expression of wonder and something deeper, something that made her voice catch for just a moment before she recovered. When the last note faded, silence reigned for 3 heartbeats. Then the applause exploded, genuine and enthusiastic. People were calling out requests, asking for more, and Eleanor found herself smiling, really smiling in a way she hadn't while performing since she was a child. She sang 5 more songs that night, a mix of ballads and livelier tunes. The musicians accompanied her with increasing confidence, and the crowd sang along when they knew the words. It was nothing like her previous performances, with their rigid formality and critical audiences. This was music for its own sake, for joy and community, and the simple pleasure of sharing something beautiful. When she finally stepped down from the stage, pleading exhaustion, Tom was there immediately. He didn't say anything, just offered his arm and escorted her to a quiet corner where they could sit. "You've been holding out on me," he said finally, his voice filled with awe. "Eleanor, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Where did you learn to sing like that?" Eleanor felt the familiar walls trying to rise, the instinct to deflect and hide. But looking at Tom's open, honest face, she found she couldn't lie to him. Not anymore. "My father was a vocal instructor," she said slowly. "He trained me from childhood. I performed in concert halls, private events, anywhere he could book me. It was his entire life, making me into the perfect singer." "But you ran away from it," Tom said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's why you came here." "After he died, I realized I had never chosen music for myself. He had forced it on me, controlled every aspect of my training, my performances, my life. I loved singing once when I was very young, but he turned it into something painful, a prison made of notes and expectations." Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "I swore I would never sing again, that I would be free of it." Tom took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle. "But you sang tonight." "I wanted to," Eleanor whispered. "For the first time in years, I wanted to share my voice, not because someone demanded it, but because I chose to. Because these people you have been so kind to me, I wanted to give something back." "Eleanor." Tom shifted closer, his eyes intense. "I need you to understand something. What I feel for you, it has nothing to do with your voice. You're clever and strong and kind. You help me with thunder without hesitating. You make me laugh. You listen when I talk about my dreams like they matter. That's who you are to me. The singing, beautiful as it is, it's just one small part of you." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I've spent so long being defined by my voice, being valued only for what I could perform. I don't know how to be anything else." "Then let me show you." Tom raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles softly. "Let me prove that I see all of you, not just the parts that shine on stage." Looking into his eyes, Eleanor believed him. And for the first time since arriving in Animas Forks, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than simple survival. She imagined happiness, partnership, perhaps even love. "I'd like that," she said. Tom's smile was radiant. "Good. Because I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Novak, and I wanted you to know before this goes any further." Eleanor's breath caught. No one had ever said such words to her, not with such unguarded honesty. In Philadelphia, men had praised her talent, had sought her company for the prestige of being seen with a known performer. But Tom saw her, really saw her, and loved what he found. "I'm falling in love with you too," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't want to, didn't plan to, but you make me feel safe and valued and free all at the same time." Tom stood, gently pulling her to her feet. "Come with me." He led her outside into the cold November night, Snow was falling softly, and their breath created clouds in the frozen air. The music from the hall drifted out, muffled and distant. Above them, stars blazed in the clear mountain sky, so bright and numerous it looked like someone had scattered diamonds across black velvet. "Eleanor Novak," Tom said, taking both her hands in his. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I know you came here to start fresh without complications. But I can't help what I feel. You're the finest woman I've ever met, and I want to spend my life proving that to you every single day." Eleanor's heart raced. "Tom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I want to court you proper, with everyone knowing my intentions. I'm saying that someday, when you're ready, I want to ask you to be my wife. I'm saying that everything I'm building, everything I'm working toward, I want it to be for us, not just me." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, freezing almost immediately in the cold. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Tom pulled her close, and Eleanor went willingly, resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heart thundering, matching her own. His arms wrapped around her, strong and secure, and Eleanor felt something inside her unfurl, some tightly held tension finally releasing. "I want you to keep singing," Tom murmured into her hair. "Not because anyone demands it, but because it makes you happy. Your voice is a gift, Eleanor, and it should bring you joy, not pain." "With you, I think it could," Eleanor said. "Tonight, singing for people who just wanted to share in something beautiful, not to judge or critique, it reminded me of why I fell in love with music in the first place." They stood together in the falling snow, holding each other, while inside the hall the celebration continued. Eleanor had come to Animas Forks to hide, to disappear, to become someone unremarkable and forgotten. Instead, she had found a community, a purpose, and against all expectations, a love that saw her completely and cherished what it found. Winter descended on Animas Forks with the full force of mountain weather. Snow piled 10 feet high, and the temperature plummeted to bone-chilling depths. The town became isolated, cut off from the lower valleys by impassable roads. But inside the small community, life continued with a resilient determination. Tom visited Eleanor as often as the weather permitted, which meant sometimes going days without seeing her when blizzards raged. On clear days, he would ride up from Triple Creek Ranch, his horse plowing through snow drifts, just to spend a few hours in her company. They sat in the boarding house parlor, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Sullivan, talking for hours or simply reading together in comfortable silence. Eleanor continued her seamstress work, which increased as people needed warmer clothing and repairs to existing garments. But she also began teaching music to 3 young girls in town whose mothers thought they should learn refinement. Eleanor approached these lessons differently than her father had taught her, focusing on joy and expression rather than rigid perfection. The girls bloomed under her gentle guidance, and their obvious happiness in learning reminded Eleanor daily of what music could be when approached with love rather than cruelty. On Christmas Eve, the community gathered again in the hall. Eleanor sang carols, her voice joining with the rough but heartfelt chorus of miners and ranchers. Tom stood beside her, his untrained baritone rumbling along with the familiar hymns. Afterward, he presented her with a gift he had carved himself, a small wooden bird with wings spread in flight, every feather detailed with loving care. "For freedom," he said simply, and Eleanor clutched it to her heart, too moved for words. She gave him a shirt she had made, carefully tailored to his measurements, with his initials embroidered on the pocket. "So you'll think of me when you wear it," she said. "I think of you constantly anyway," Tom replied, making her blush. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Tom began talking more seriously about his future plans. He had saved enough money to put a down payment on a parcel of land, adjacent to Triple Creek Ranch. Mr. Harrison, the owner, had agreed to sell him 50 acres at a fair price, recognizing Tom's years of dedicated service. It's got good grazing, a creek running through it, and a spot that would be perfect for building a house, Tom explained one afternoon in March as they walked along the partially thawed creek. I'm thinking I could start with horses, maybe a small herd of cattle, build it up slow and steady. It sounds wonderful, Eleanor said, genuinely happy for him, but she couldn't help the small pang of uncertainty. Where did she fit in his plans? Tom stopped walking and turned to face her. Eleanor, I'm building this for us. I thought you understood that. You haven't actually asked me anything, she pointed out, though her heart was racing. You're right. Tom suddenly looked nervous, his confidence faltering. I've been assuming, and that's not fair. Eleanor, would you consider, when the time is right, when you feel ready, would you consider marrying me and building a life together? Eleanor pretended to think about it, watching Tom's growing anxiety with amusement. I suppose I could consider it, she said finally, unable to keep the smile from her face. In fact, I've already considered it quite thoroughly, and my answer is yes. Whenever you're ready to make it official, my answer is yes. Tom whooped with joy, actually lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Eleanor laughed, her arms wrapped around his neck, feeling lighter than air. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands, his expression suddenly serious. I want to do this right, he said. I want to build us a proper home first, get the ranch started, prove I can provide for you. Is it all right if we wait a bit longer? Just until summer maybe, when I've got the foundation laid. I've waited my whole life to feel like this, Eleanor said softly. A few more months won't hurt. Tom kissed her forehead gently, the most physical affection they had allowed themselves. I promised to make it worth the wait. Spring brought renewed activity to Animas Forks. The snow melted in rushing torrents, filling the creeks to overflowing. Mining operations resumed in earnest, and supply wagons once again made the treacherous journey up from the lower elevations. Tom threw himself into preparing his land, working from dawn to dusk alongside hired help to clear the building site and construct a house. Eleanor visited the property whenever she could, watching walls rise from the foundation, seeing Tom's dream take physical shape. The house was modest but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a main room for cooking and living, and a real wooden floor instead of packed dirt. Tom had even included a small room that could serve as Eleanor's sewing space, with windows facing east to catch the morning light. What do you think? Tom asked anxiously one May afternoon as they stood surveying the nearly completed structure. I think it's perfect, Eleanor said honestly. I think it's home. Tom pulled her close, and Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder, imagining their life in this place. She could picture winter evenings by the fire, summer mornings with windows open to mountain breezes, building something real and lasting together. I was thinking, Tom said carefully, maybe a June wedding. That gives us another month to finish everything, and the weather should be good for folks traveling to the ceremony. June sounds perfect. There's one thing I wanted to ask you. Tom turned to face her, taking both her hands. I know you came here to escape your old life, and I respect that. But Eleanor, your voice is so beautiful, and it would mean the world to me if you would sing at our wedding. Not for anyone else, just for us, to celebrate the life we're starting. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Tom understood her complicated relationship with her talent, yet he asked anyway, not as a demand but as a gift she could choose to give. I would love to sing at our wedding, she said. What would you like to hear? Anything you want, something that makes you happy. Eleanor thought about it, running through possibilities. Then she remembered a song her mother had sung, a simple ballad about enduring love and partnership. "I know the perfect piece," she said. The next month passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Eleanor sewed her own wedding dress from white muslin. Mrs. Sullivan had ordered specially from Denver, adding delicate embroidery at the hem and sleeves. The women of Animas Forks rallied to help, contributing lace, ribbons, and flowers carefully cultivated in protected gardens. Tom completed the house and moved his few belongings in, though he continued staying at the ranch bunkhouse until after the wedding. He broke 3 more horses for Mr. Harrison, earning extra money for furniture and supplies. The Triple Creek Cowboys threw him a rowdy bachelor party that left him hungover but grinning. Finally, on a brilliant Saturday in mid-June, Eleanor stood in the small church portion of the community hall, wearing her white dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. After all the years of performing before critical audiences, after all the pressure and pain associated with her voice, she was about to sing purely for love. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. The circuit preacher who visited Animas Forks quarterly spoke about partnership and commitment. Tom looked impossibly handsome in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. She felt beautiful under his gaze, not for her voice or her training, but simply for being herself. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Tom kissed her with a tenderness that made Eleanor's knees weak. The small gathering of friends and neighbors applauded, and Eleanor felt embraced by their genuine happiness for the couple. Then came the moment she had both anticipated and feared. The musicians took their places, and Eleanor stepped forward. Tom stood close by, his presence a steadying comfort. She had chosen a song called "My Love's Like a Red, Red Rose," set to a traditional Scottish melody. Her mother had sung it often, and Eleanor had always associated it with pure, uncomplicated love. As she began to sing, her voice filled the hall with crystalline beauty. But this time, there was no fear, no resentment, no sense of performing under compulsion. Eleanor sang from her heart, every word a promise to the man she had just married, every note an expression of the love that had grown between them. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop, pouring everything she felt into the music. When she finished, Tom was crying too, unashamed. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close while their friends cheered and celebrated around them. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "That was the most precious gift you could have given me." "I love you," Eleanor said, the words coming easily now. "I love you so much, Thomas Irving." "I love you too, Mrs. Irving." The celebration that followed was joyful and unrestrained. There was dancing and food and toasts with whiskey that burned Eleanor's throat. She had never felt so accepted, so fully herself, as she did surrounded by this community that had welcomed her and this man who cherished her completely. As evening approached, Tom led Eleanor outside to where Thunder waited, decorated with ribbons. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "More than ready." They rode together to their little house, Eleanor seated in front of Tom on the saddle, his arms secure around her. The setting sun painted the mountains gold and orange, and Eleanor thought she had never seen anything so beautiful. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet, filled with whispered words and gentle discoveries. Eleanor had been nervous, knowing so little about physical intimacy, but Tom was patient and loving, making her feel cherished rather than used. They fell asleep tangled together, and Eleanor woke in the night to find Tom watching her with such love in his eyes that she had to kiss him again. The first months of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Running a small ranch required constant work, from mending fences to tending horses to putting up hay for winter. Eleanor had never worked so hard physically, and some nights she fell into bed exhausted. But there was satisfaction in the labor, in building something with her own hands alongside her husband. She continued her seamstress work, which provided steady income while the ranch got established. Her music students increased to 7 children, and she found genuine pleasure in nurturing their talents. Sometimes in the evenings, she would sing while Tom played his harmonica, their voices and music blending in the cozy house. In September, Eleanor realized she had missed her monthly courses. A visit to the midwife confirmed what she suspected. She was pregnant. When she told Tom, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, just as he had when she first agreed to marry him. "A baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, though his joy was obvious. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I'm grateful and amazed and a little terrified," Tom admitted. "What if I'm not a good father?" Eleanor cupped his face in her hands. "You'll be wonderful. You're kind and patient and loving. Our child will be lucky to have you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Eleanor continued working as long as she could, though Tom fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more than she felt necessary. As her body changed, growing round with their child, Eleanor marveled at the miracle of it, at the life they had created together. Winter was difficult, with Eleanor heavily pregnant and unable to move as easily as before. Tom barely left her side except when absolutely necessary for ranch work. They spent long evenings by the fire, Tom reading aloud while Eleanor sewed tiny clothes for the baby. "Boy or girl?" Tom asked one night in February as Eleanor rested against him on their small sofa. "I don't care as long as the baby is healthy," Eleanor said. "Though a boy who looks like you would be wonderful." "Or a girl with your beauty and talent," Tom countered. Eleanor placed his hand on her swollen belly and they felt the baby kick. "Strong, whatever the gender," she said. In early March, during a brief thaw, Eleanor's labor began. The midwife was summoned, and Tom paced anxiously outside their bedroom while Eleanor worked to bring their child into the world. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Tom heard Eleanor's cries and wanted desperately to be with her, but the midwife insisted he would only be in the way. Finally, as the sun reached its peak, a baby's cry pierced the air. The midwife emerged, tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Irving. A big, healthy boy." Tom rushed into the bedroom to find Eleanor propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "Tom, meet your son," she said softly. Tom approached cautiously, awed by the tiny person Eleanor held. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. When Tom gently touched his son's hand, tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Tom whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You're perfect. Thank you, Eleanor." They named him James Thomas Irving after Tom's father and Tom himself. Little Jamie, as they called him, had his mother's gray eyes and his father's determined chin. He was a good baby, sleeping reasonably well and nursing enthusiastically. Eleanor found motherhood both harder and more rewarding than she had imagined. The constant demands of caring for an infant left her exhausted, but watching Jamie grow and develop filled her with profound joy. Tom was a devoted father, walking the floor with Jamie when he fussed, changing soiled diapers without complaint, singing silly songs that made the baby coo. As spring turned to summer, life settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor managed both motherhood and her work, though she reduced her students to just 3. Tom's horse breeding operation began to show promise, with 2 mares expecting foals and interest from neighboring ranches in his training services. One evening in July, as they sat outside watching the sunset with Jamie sleeping between them in a basket, Tom turned to Eleanor with a serious expression. "What is it?" she asked, concerned. "I've been thinking about how much our lives have changed in less than 2 years," Tom said. "When I met you, I was just a ranch hand with a dream. Now I have a wife I adore, a son who amazes me every day, and a real chance at building something lasting. Sometimes I can't believe this is my life." Eleanor reached for his hand. "I know what you mean. 2 years ago, I was running from everything I knew, convinced I could never be happy, that music and love would only ever bring pain. But you showed me I was wrong. You gave me a home, a family, a life where I can choose my own path." "Do you ever miss it?" Tom asked. "The performing, the grand stages, the applause." Eleanor considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the music itself, the challenge of a difficult piece, the thrill of hitting a perfect note. But I don't miss the life that came with it. I don't miss being controlled and critiqued and valued only for what I could produce. Here, with you, I can sing because I want to when I want to, for people who appreciate it without demanding perfection." "You still have the most beautiful voice I've ever heard," Tom said. "I hope Jamie inherits your talent." "And I hope he inherits your kindness and integrity," Eleanor replied. "Though honestly, I'll be happy if he's healthy and loved, whatever talents he develops." Jamie stirred in his basket, making the little snuffling sounds that indicated he would wake soon and want feeding. Eleanor lifted him, marveling as always at how light he felt, how perfectly he fit in her arms. Tom moved closer, wrapping an arm around both of them. "I love you," he said simply. "Both of you. You're my whole world." "And you're ours," Eleanor replied, her heart full to bursting. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges, as all lives do. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, with Tom developing a reputation for quality horses throughout the San Juan Mountains. Eleanor continued teaching music, finding deep satisfaction in nurturing young talents while raising her own son. When Jamie was 3, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy resulted in twin girls, Sarah and Grace, born on a snowy December morning. The house that had seemed perfectly adequate suddenly felt cramped with 5 occupants, and Tom spent the next spring building an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the main living space. Eleanor sometimes sang for local gatherings, always by choice, always finding joy in sharing her gift. The fear and resentment that had once accompanied her music faded completely, replaced by the simple pleasure of artistic expression. She taught her children to love music too, not through rigid discipline but through games and lullabies and family sing-alongs. Jamie showed an aptitude for horses that made Tom beam with pride. By age 8, he was helping with the gentler animals, learning to read their moods and movements. The twins were quieter, more introspective, but both showed musical inclination. Sarah particularly had inherited Eleanor's vocal range, though Eleanor was careful never to push, never to demand more than the child wanted to give. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tom surprised Eleanor by organizing a celebration at the community hall. The whole valley turned out, bringing food and gifts and good wishes. The original musicians who had accompanied Eleanor's first public performance in Animas Forks were there, older now but still playing with enthusiasm. "Speech," someone called out, and Tom stood, pulling Eleanor up beside him. "10 years ago," Tom began, his voice carrying through the hall, "I met a woman who had come to our town looking for a fresh start. She was guarded and careful, hiding parts of herself that she thought were too precious or painful to share. I fell in love with her almost immediately, not knowing about the incredible gift she possessed, just knowing she was kind and strong and made me want to be a better man." Eleanor felt tears starting, as they always did when Tom spoke from his heart. Then one night, at a harvest festival much like this one, she shared her voice with us. And I realized that love isn't about possessing someone's gifts. It's about creating a safe space where those gifts can flourish freely. Eleanor, you've given me 10 years of happiness, 3 beautiful children, and a life richer than I ever imagined possible. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. The crowd applauded, but Eleanor barely heard them. She stood on her toes and kissed Tom, putting all her love and gratitude into it. When they separated, she turned to address their friends. "I came to Animas Forks broken and afraid," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I thought I was hiding, running away from a life I couldn't bear. But really, I was running toward something I hadn't yet found. Tom saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I felt worthless, and loved me into wholeness. Our life together isn't always easy, but it's real and it's ours, built on honesty and respect and genuine partnership. I'm grateful for every day." Then, without anyone asking, Eleanor began to sing. She chose the same song she had performed at their wedding, "My Louvre's like a red, red rose," but her voice had matured over the decade, gaining depth and richness from years of genuine happiness. The hall fell silent, everyone transfixed by the pure beauty of her singing. Tom watched her with the same wonder he had shown that first night, and Eleanor sang directly to him, every word a reaffirmation of their vows, every note a celebration of the life they had built together. Their children sat in the front row, Jamie between his sisters, all 3 watching their mother with pride and love. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. But Eleanor only cared about Tom's reaction, the tears streaming down his face, the love shining in his eyes. He pulled her close, and they held each other while their community celebrated around them. The evening continued with dancing and music and storytelling. Eleanor sang several more songs, her children joining in on the ones they knew. Tom danced with each of his daughters, then with Eleanor, their movements as comfortable and synchronized as their life together. As the night wound down and families began heading home, Eleanor stood outside under the stars with Tom, watching the children play one last game before bed. The June night was mild and perfect, the mountains looming dark against the star-filled sky. "Happy?" Tom asked, though he surely knew the answer. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Eleanor confirmed. "I used to think happiness meant escaping demands and expectations, just being left alone. But real happiness is this: being known completely and loved anyway, building something meaningful with someone you trust, watching your children grow in an environment of safety and affection." "Pretty profound for a simple cowboy's wife," Tom teased gently. Eleanor laughed. "Nothing about you is simple, Thomas Irving. You're the most complicated, wonderful, frustrating, amazing man I've ever known." "Right back at you, Mrs. Irving." They called the children, and the family walked together back to their wagon for the ride home. Jamie rode Thunder, now an older but still dignified horse, while the girls piled in the wagon bed with Eleanor and Tom on the bench. The moon lit their path, and someone started a song that everyone knew, their voices blending in imperfect but heartfelt harmony. The following years brought the inevitable changes that time always brings. The children grew, developing their own personalities and interests. Jamie became an expert horseman, eventually taking over much of the ranch's day-to-day operations. Sarah pursued music seriously, studying with her mother before eventually traveling to Denver for more advanced training, though she always returned to Animas Forks, having learned from her mother's experience that talent without happiness was an empty achievement. Grace surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for business, helping manage the ranch's finances and contracts with a shrewd intelligence that made the operation more profitable than ever. Eleanor and Tom aged too, their hair graying, their bodies showing the wear of hard mountain living. But their love remained constant, deepening with each passing year. They still danced in their kitchen when the mood struck, still sat together watching sunsets, still found joy in simple companionship. When Eleanor was 45, she received a letter from Philadelphia. A former colleague of her father's had tracked her down, writing to tell her that her performances were still remembered, that there was a standing offer to return and resume her career if she wished. Eleanor read the letter once, then burned it in the fireplace. Tom watched without comment, trusting her to make her own choice. "No regrets?" he asked later. "Not a single one," Eleanor said firmly. "That life was never mine. It was my father's dream imposed on me. This life, our life, is the one I chose. It's messy and hard and sometimes overwhelming, but it's real and it's mine, and I wouldn't trade it for all the opera houses in the world." Tom kissed her temple. "I'm glad you chose me." "I'm glad you chose me first," Eleanor countered. "I was so lost when I came here, so convinced I had to hide everything important about myself to be safe. You taught me that being seen, being known, is actually the greatest safety of all. Because when someone truly knows you and loves you anyway, you can face anything." As the years continued their steady march, Eleanor and Tom watched their children marry and start families of their own. Jamie wed a rancher's daughter from down valley, and they built a house on the far corner of the property. Sarah married a musician she met in Denver, and they split their time between the city and Animas Forks, giving concerts and teaching. Grace shocked everyone by falling in love with a banker's son and moving to Silverton, though she visited frequently and managed the ranch's accounts remotely. Eleanor became a grandmother 6 times over, delighting in the babies and toddlers who filled the house with noise and energy. She sang to her grandchildren as she had to her own children, passing down the lullabies her mother had taught her, the folk songs she had learned to love, even some of the classical pieces that had once been sources of pain, but had been redeemed through time and healing. On their 25th anniversary, the family gathered for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren filled every corner of the expanded house. Friends from throughout the valley came to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. Eleanor, now 52 with silver threading through her dark hair, stood before the gathering and sang once more. Her voice had lost some of its youthful power, but had gained a richness and emotional depth that came only from a life fully lived. She sang of love and loss, joy and sorrow, struggle and triumph, her voice weaving the story of a quarter-century of marriage. Tom, his own hair completely gray now, his face lined but still handsome, listened with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. When Eleanor finished, he stood and embraced her before everyone, declaring his love as openly as he had 25 years before. Their oldest grandson, Jamie's boy Thomas, who was learning fiddle from his Aunt Sarah, struck up a waltz. Tom bowed formally to Eleanor, and she curtsied in return, both of them grinning. They moved onto the floor and began to dance, their steps still synchronized despite aging joints and slower movements. One by one, their children and grandchildren joined them, filling the room with spinning couples and laughter. Eleanor looked around at the family they had created, at the love they had nurtured, and felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. Later, after the guests had departed and the house had quieted, Eleanor and Tom sat together on their porch watching the stars. The night was cool, autumn approaching, and Tom wrapped a blanket around Eleanor's shoulders. "You know what I think about sometimes," Eleanor said softly. "That day I stepped off the stagecoach in Animas Forks, terrified and alone, convinced I had to hide my true self to survive. I was so wrong about everything. This place, these people, you most of all, you didn't want me to hide. You wanted me to bloom. You would have bloomed anywhere, Tom said. You're too strong, too vital to be suppressed forever. I just happened to be lucky enough to be there when you were ready. We were both lucky, Eleanor insisted. You were looking for partnership, for someone to build a life with, and somehow we found each other at exactly the right moment. If I had come a year earlier or later, if you had already left for a different ranch, if 1,000 small things had been different, we might never have met. But we did meet, Tom pointed out. And everything that came after, every joy and struggle and ordinary day, we faced it together. That's what I'm most proud of, Eleanor. Not the ranch or the children or any material success. I'm proud that we built a partnership based on genuine love and respect, that we saw each other through hard times and celebrated the good times, that we never stopped choosing each other. Eleanor leaned her head on Tom's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. I love you, she said simply. After all these years, through all the changes, that's the one constant. I love you. I love you too, Tom replied. Always have, always will. They sat in comfortable silence, wrapped in blankets and memories, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the house, a grandchild cried and was quickly soothed. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of coming snow. A horse whinnied from the barn, probably old Thunder, now retired but still keeping watch over his domain. This was Eleanor's life now, so different from what she had once imagined, so much richer than anything she could have planned. She had come to the mountains to hide but had found instead a place to truly live. Her voice, once a source of pain and control, had become a gift she could share freely. The love she had thought herself incapable of receiving had surrounded her, lifted her, sustained her through every challenge. As the years continued, Eleanor and Tom settled into the gentle rhythm of elder life. The ranch ran smoothly under Jamie's management. The grandchildren grew and some began to have children of their own, making Eleanor and Tom great-grandparents. Their health remained reasonably good, though Tom's knees troubled him in cold weather, and Eleanor's hands sometimes ached from decades of sewing. Eleanor was 63 when Tom fell ill. What started as a simple cough developed into a serious lung infection. The doctor from Silverton made the difficult journey up to Animas Forks, but his prognosis was grim. Tom's lungs were damaged from years of mountain air and hard work, and at 65, his body struggled to fight the infection. For 2 weeks, Eleanor barely left Tom's bedside. She sang to him when he was restless, read to him when he was calm, held his hand through fever and chills. Their children took turns sitting with them, but mostly it was Eleanor and Tom, facing this challenge as they had faced everything else, together. I'm not afraid, Tom told her one evening when his breathing was particularly labored. I've had a good life, Eleanor, better than I ever deserved. If this is my time, I'm grateful for every moment we had. Don't talk like that, Eleanor said fiercely, though tears streamed down her face. You're going to recover. You have to. I'm not ready to do this without you. Tom squeezed her hand weakly. You're the strongest person I know. You survived things I can't even imagine before we met, and you'll survive this too. Our children need you, the grandchildren need you. Your music needs you. I don't care about any of it without you, Eleanor whispered. Yes, you do, Tom said gently. You care deeply about all of it. That's one of the things I love most about you, your capacity to love fully and fight fiercely for what matters. Promise me you'll keep doing that, keep living and loving and singing even after I'm gone. Tom, please. Promise me, Eleanor. Through her tears, Eleanor nodded. I promise. But you're not leaving yet. You're going to fight this and get better, and we're going to have more years together. Tom smiled, though it clearly cost him effort. I'll try. For you, I'll try. Whether through Eleanor's fierce determination, the family's prayers, or simply good fortune, Tom's fever broke 2 days later. His recovery was slow and left him weaker than before, but he survived. By Christmas, he was walking again with a cane, sitting by the fire with his great-grandchildren on his lap. That winter was gentle to them both, as if nature itself recognized they had earned some ease. Spring came early, and with it renewed strength for Tom. He couldn't work the ranch anymore, but he could sit on the porch and offer advice, could carve toys for the children, could hold Eleanor's hand while they watched the mountains change with the seasons. On their 30th anniversary, the family once again gathered for celebration. It was a quieter affair than previous milestones, with Tom unable to dance and Eleanor's voice showing the strain of age. But the love in the room was palpable, generations of family bound together by the example of the couple at the center. Eleanor sang one song that evening, a simple ballad about enduring love. Her voice cracked on some of the high notes, but no one cared. The emotion behind the singing, the lifetime of love it represented, was more moving than any technically perfect performance could have been. 30 years, Tom marveled afterward. 30 years of waking up next to you, of building this life together. If someone had told that young ranch hand he would end up here, surrounded by all this love, he wouldn't have believed it possible. If someone had told that frightened girl on the stagecoach she would find genuine happiness, she wouldn't have believed it either, Eleanor replied. But we both took chances, both opened our hearts, and look what we created. They lived 5 more years together, years filled with the quiet joys of long marriage and large family. They saw great-grandchildren grow and begin to show their own talents and interests. They weathered hard winters and celebrated beautiful summers. They argued occasionally and made up always, their bond too strong to be broken by petty disagreements. Tom passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks after their 35th anniversary, Eleanor beside him as she had been for 35 years. He simply didn't wake up one morning, his heart finally giving out after 7 decades of hard use. The grief threatened to drown Eleanor, but she remembered her promise and kept breathing, kept living, kept finding reasons to get out of bed each day. The family rallied around her, and Eleanor found comfort in being needed. She helped with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, continued teaching music to local children, maintained the house and property with Jamie's help. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch where she and Tom had spent so many hours, feeling his presence in the familiar creak of the boards, the whisper of the wind through the pines. She lived another 12 years as a widow, reaching the remarkable age of 80. Her voice remained her companion, though she sang less frequently in public. But in her home, with family gathered around, she would still lift her voice in the old songs, the ballads and hymns that had marked the important moments of her life. On a clear September morning, Eleanor passed away surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and several great-grandchildren. Her last words were sung rather than spoken, a few bars of "My Louv's like a red, red rose," her voice thin and wavering but still recognizably beautiful. Then she closed her eyes and slipped away, finally reunited with the man who had taught her what real love meant. The funeral was the largest Animas Forks had ever seen, with people traveling from all over Colorado to pay respects. Stories were shared about Eleanor's kindness, her talent, her strength. Her granddaughter Sarah sang during the service, her voice echoing her grandmother's in tone and beauty, carrying on the musical legacy Eleanor had fought so hard to reclaim. Eleanor was buried next to Tom in the small cemetery overlooking the valley, their headstones side by side just as they had lived. The inscription on hers reads simply, "Eleanor Irving, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She found her voice and shared it freely. Years later, their great-great-grandchildren would still tell the story of Eleanor and Tom, the seamstress who hid a beautiful voice and the cowboy who helped her reclaim it. The tale grew and shifted with each retelling, but the core remained true. Two people found each other in an unlikely place, built a life on honesty and love, and created a legacy that extended far beyond themselves. The little house they had built together still stood, expanded and modified by generations of family, but essentially unchanged. The ranch they had started continued to operate, known throughout Colorado for quality horses and ethical treatment of animals. The music Eleanor had taught lived on in her descendants, some of whom became professional musicians while others simply sang for joy around family tables. But perhaps most importantly, the love story of Eleanor and Tom Irving became a touchstone for their family, a reminder that real love sees fully and cherishes completely, that hiding one's true self is no protection, that taking the risk to be known is always worth it when the right person does the knowing. They had shown multiple generations what partnership looked like, how two people could build something lasting through respect, communication, and unwavering commitment to each other's happiness. In the end, Eleanor had come to Animas Forks seeking to hide and had found instead the freedom to be fully herself. Tom had been looking for partnership and had discovered a love deeper than he had imagined possible. Together, they had built not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of genuine affection and mutual support that would ripple forward through time, touching lives they would never know, proving that love, when rooted in truth and nurtured with care, can indeed last beyond any single lifetime. The mountains that had witnessed their first meeting continued to stand, eternal and unchanging, while the seasons turned and new generations were born and grew, and eventually told their own children about the seamstress and the cowboy whose love had built an empire of family and music and enduring devotion. Their story became legend, and their love became legacy, and everything they had fought for and built together lived on, testimony to what two people can create when they choose each other freely and love each other fully, holding nothing back, hiding nothing, giving everything.